August 5th, 2016, Charlotte, North Carolina. It's the last days of a sweltering summer in the Tar Heel state.
Charlotte is one of the fastest growing cities in America, and that's been that way for decades now.
It's a college town, and UNC Charlotte sits right in the middle of University City Boulevard.
It's a wonderful place, just wonderful.
But as night falls on the charming city, a desperate 911 call comes in to local dispatch.
The dispatch received a very unsettling, disturbing call.
The caller identifies herself as 46-year-old Katrina Paul.
She seemed to be in hotter distress, and she was stumbling over her words.
Katrina said she'd been shot.
Stop me. He shot me.
Okay, where did you wait for that?
In my head.
You were shot in the head?
Yes, ma'am.
Katrina goes on to say that she isn't the only victim in need of medical assistance.
She said her fiance, Michael Gretzinger, had also been shot.
Okay, where did you get shot at?
He's in the head.
By the time police arrive on the scene, Katrina is barely conscious.
You take her, I've got him.
And her fiancé, Michael, is in even more dire shape.
Hey, sir, can you hear me?
He was alive, but barely.
I've got a pulse here.
He was non-responsive and unconscious, unable to communicate to them.
Michael was on the brink of death, and they had to move fast if they wanted to save his life.
38-year-old Army veteran Michael Gretzinger had a passion for creativity.
After concluding his time in the military in 2009, he started pursuing some of his other dreams.
He wanted to pursue an acting career.
He also wrote poetry.
He was always looking out for everybody, trying to lift people up and inspire them.
To fund his passions, Michael started working odd jobs around the Charlotte metropolitan area.
Eventually, he found a job at a grocery store.
And it was there he met 44-year-old Katrina Paul.
My mom met Michael at work. They worked together and became close. He was a cool dude.
You say you write poetry?
Yeah, not like Shakespeare or whatever.
Okay.
More like spoken word stuff.
Well, that's really cool.
Michael was drawn to Katrina's bubbly personality.
My mom's very goofy, and her laughter is amazing as well. She laughs about anything. She talks to anyone, and she hugs everybody. That's the warm spirit in her.
As outgoing as she was, she's like, you know, kind of like the life of the party in a sense. And I think he was like one of those kind of guys where like he didn't meet a stranger.
It wasn't long before the two became more than just co-workers.
They would be around each other, and it was kind of like a puppy love kind of thing. They had that kind of newfound love that felt familiar. I could tell that my mom was happy.
After just 6 months of dating, Michael proposed.
When Michael wanted to take it to the next level with my mom, I gave him my blessing because he was so respectable about it. He didn't want to impose, he didn't want to intrude. And I'm a mama's boy, so that was important to me. It only felt natural that they would be looking for happily ever after.
And as their wedding day drew near, everything seemed to be going the happy couple's way.
The two started to look for a place to live together, and they found a place in the university area of Charlotte.
She was super excited. We talked about her decorating and decor and things like that.
Michael also found a new job in radio that he really enjoyed.
He went on to become a well-known and respected, fun-loving radio DJ.
For Michael and Katrina, it seemed like the sky was the limit.
They had like this kind of like glow, sparkle kind of romance.
But now, first responders have arrived at the couple's apartment to find them both suffering from gunshot wounds to the head.
paramedics determined that both were in very serious condition and in need of immediate medical care.
It was a miracle that either of them was still alive.
And as an ambulance rushes them to the closest hospital, their lives hang in the balance.
It quickly became a race against the clock.
It's unclear if either will see the light of day in the morning.
After settling down in Charlotte, North Carolina, 38-year-old Michael Gretzinger was pursuing his dreams with the support and encouragement of the woman he loved, Katrina Paul.
My mom met Michael at work and fell in love. They were together about 6 months before he proposed, and they moved in together.
The engaged couple was looking forward to what the future held in store for them.
I think they just were excited about taking it to the next level. It was like that commitment to each other for the rest of their lives.
But now, it's uncertain if they'll even live through the night as paramedics rush them to the emergency room.
They are both clinging to life.
She had been shot in the head twice and was teetering on the edge of consciousness the entire time. But he was in much worse condition than she was. He was non-responsive.
While ER doctors work to stabilize the couple, detectives arrive at their apartment and begin trying to piece together what happened.
Why would somebody do this to somebody, first of all? And how do we get them behind bars and pay the penalty?
Unfortunately, detectives don't find much evidence left behind.
Investigators do not find any signs of forced entry or robbery at the scene of the crime.
To the detectives, this suggests a crime of methodical execution. Michael and his girlfriend were not the victims of a random crime.
They were targeted by someone they knew.
And one of the responding officers already has a lead on a possible suspect.
I saw someone when we first arrived.
The officer said when he arrived at the apartment complex, he saw a man running with a towel.
Hey!
The officer explains he tried to run after the mysterious individual, but he soon disappeared into the night.
The officer said that he saw him about 60 yards away, and so he wasn't able to give a very good description.
Be on the lookout for a black male, 5'9", green shirt.
Okay.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Armed with this description, the officers start knocking on the doors of neighbors, looking to see if they can provide any more additional information.
Unfortunately, none of the neighbors has seen a man matching the suspect's description.
None of the people that the officers spoke to reported seeing anyone in a green shirt the night before, and actually had no recollection of anyone fitting that description living in the community at all.
Meanwhile, news of the shooting is spreading to Katrina and Michael's loved ones.
I got a call. It was a detective on the phone. He was like, well, I need you to get to Carolina Medical Center. Your mother's been in a fatal accident. I tried to not cry, but I couldn't help it. I was just emotional, and I was a nervous wreck.
As Nikki races to the hospital, she tries to get the rest of her siblings on the phone.
I started calling my brothers, TJ and Ty, my sister as well.
I answered her phone, and it was like my mother was in the hospital, that she's been shot. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, who did it. I just got up and went to the hospital.
I think I was either at work or leaving work in Columbia, South Carolina, when I got that call. And I just remember my colleagues saying, it's not safe for you to drive. You shouldn't drive like this. You're too emotional.
When Katrina's children arrive at the hospital, they're overwhelmed with fear and confusion.
It was just like, it was like everything was stopped. It was in slow motion at that time. Like, I just wanted to see my mama and make sure she was okay at that time.
Seeing my mother on that bed, it was something that I never thought I would see.
Michael was on the same floor of the hospital. I remember wanting to go visit with him and see how he was doing, and I wasn't allowed to.
Detectives are hoping family members might have a lead on who did this to the beloved couple.
They asked me, do I know what happened or did I know? I'm like, sir, no.
Do you know anyone who would want to hurt your mother or Michael?
No. They're just really nice, everyday people, you know?
The family was shocked that this had happened. They were a couple that generally just spent most of their time with each other.
It was nothing I could tell them. I had the slightest idea.
They were very loving, kind, and gentle people, not the type of couple or individuals to have enemies.
But Nikki says there's something else she needs to tell the investigators.
Me and my brothers, we've been trying to get a hold of our sister Star to let her know what's going on, but she's not answering her phone.
We calling and calling and calling and calling and calling Star. She never picked up. She never answered the phone.
I remember asking, where's my sister? Where's Star?
We're really worried about her.
No one had been able to get in touch with her, and they were unable to reach her by phone for several hours. It was very concerning.
If Star knew what was going on, she would have been there. So a lot of things was just going through my head about what could have happened or what's going on.
Now the family is starting to worry. Could she be another victim in this crime?
38-year-old radio DJ Michael Gretzinger and his fiancée Katrina Paul are undergoing emergency surgery after being shot in the head in their Charlotte apartment.
The couple's loved ones couldn't believe what had just happened. No one can really imagine who could do something like this.
But while speaking to police at the hospital, Katrina's children have just revealed another cause for concern. Their sister, Star Meters, is missing.
Star was the only one that didn't come to the hospital. She didn't show up. She didn't answer the phone for none of us. She didn't call back or anything.
There's absolutely no way that something like this would have happened, and she wouldn't have been by her mother's side.
Just the fact that she's not here right now, something's got to be wrong.
Star's siblings tell the detectives that she was closer to their mother than any of them.
She was more of a mama's girl than me, you know?
She was very passionate about the things that she loved, family being probably number one.
Has your sister ever disappeared like this before? No, never.
My sister's not nowhere to be found, and our mother's laying in the hospital bed. Something ain't adding up.
They're starting to worry she could be another victim in this crime.
You're already looking at 2 victims. It's not a far stretch to think that there might be a third.
When's the last time you spoke with your sister? A few weeks ago, she came over to the house.
She called me and told me she had somebody with her. And when she showed up, the person she had with her was Tim.
Nikki explains that Timothy Crumity is her mother's ex, the man she was with before Michael.
Him and my mother, they dated for some years, but then they broke up a couple years ago.
The family goes on to tell the investigators that Timothy was the pastor of a church nearby in Concord, North Carolina.
The first time I met Tim was in middle school. I was like 12 or 13.
I never liked him at all. Like, I guess it was just the feeling that I got of his presence.
He did a lot of things behind closed doors. Timothy tried to be 2 different people.
They had an on and off again relationship. You would see him and then you wouldn't.
Katrina's family says that the more turbulent their relationship became, the more Tim showed his true colors.
Over the course of her relationship with Tim, he became more and more controlling.
Abusive, physically, I really never seen, but his words was very abusive.
And after over 10 years together, Katrina finally had enough.
She put an end to this on again and off again relationship.
When he came over to our house that day with Star, he was definitely trying to weasel his way back into our lives. What is he doing here? Just hear him out.
Listen, I really miss you guys. For a while there, I thought we was family, right?
I guess.
I got you a little something.
He tried to make a peace offering with me. He tried to bring me some liquor.
Thanks, Tim.
I apologize for everything. I hope you forgive me so we can be in each other's lives again.
That's very kind of you.
Tell your mom hello for me, okay?
Star was more forgiving, but Nikki was not buying it.
I'm like, okay, cool. Because I don't like people I don't like in my house.
I'm the oldest, so I definitely remember more about my mom's relationship with Tim, more than Star does.
Investigators agreed that Tim's behavior did seem concerning. They definitely wanted to talk to him, and as soon as possible.
But could a man of God really be capable of this kind of attack?
Hey, come here. You're gonna want to take a look at this.
They were shocked to find that he had an alarming and long criminal history, spanning back as far as 25 years. And this isn't the first time he's been suspected of murder.
North Carolina police investigating the shooting of Michael Gretzinger and his fiancée Katrina Paul have discovered that Katrina's 29-year-old daughter, Star, is also missing.
Nobody could find her. She was just like, she just fell off the earth. I was calling and calling and calling and calling and calling people, but nobody saw her or seen her.
Detectives have also learned that Katrina's volatile ex, Timothy Crumity, had recently been trying to rekindle a relationship with the family.
Timothy is a local pastor at a church in Concord, North Carolina.
But while Tim may preach the word of God, his rap sheet is more befitting of a career criminal.
Hey, come here and take a look at this.
Police records indicated that Tim has spent nearly a decade of his life behind bars.
Timothy was a good manipulator, so he made himself look good, but was also a bad person at the same time.
Arrest records show that Tim's first serious run-in with the law dates back to 1989.
In September of that year, Tim was arrested for armed robbery and receiving stolen goods in Onslow County, North Carolina.
For his crime, Tim was sentenced to 8 years in prison and finally released in 1998.
After he was released, it seemed like Tim was just living a normal, law-abiding citizen type of life.
He got a job with a flooring company in Kannapolis, a city just north of Charlotte, and he was also serving as a pastor for a local church.
But just a few years later, Tim found himself back on the wrong side of the law.
In June of 2005, the boss at the flooring company where Tim worked, Danny Johnson, was found shot to death in a local park.
Danny was last seen alive with Tim at a bank in Charlotte. Danny had loaned Tim $5,000 to pay off a debt.
In September of that same year, police working the case arrested Tim for murder, under the assumption he killed Danny to avoid having to pay back the $5,000 loan.
He spent the next 5 years in Mecklenburg County Jail awaiting trial.
But after a lengthy investigation failed to turn up any physical evidence tying Tim to Danny Johnson's death, the DA was forced to drop the charges for fear of not being able to secure a guilty verdict at trial.
And in 2013, Tim was at the center of yet another homicide investigation.
On July 3rd, 2013, Tim called 911 and claimed that an armed intruder shot his then wife, Sharon.
Tim said he managed to get the gun away from the robber and shot him in the head.
He essentially described it as some sort of robbery gone wrong.
But the evidence at the crime scene didn't add up with Tim's version of events.
The robber was identified as a handyman from the neighborhood, James Luther Banks.
James and Sharon both died of gunshot wounds to the head, while Tim walked away unscathed.
James did not have a history of violent crime, and his family says that he's the furthest thing from a thief or a violent killer.
Compared it to Tim, who already had a criminal record and was suspected in a prior homicide, it just didn't add up.
Despite the suspicions surrounding Tim and his version of events, police could never prove that he was lying, and so he was never actually charged with the death of these two people.
After being involved in 2 homicides, you would think Tim would lay low. But less than 6 months later, he became a subject of another police investigation.
In December 2013, Tim's house burned to the ground. Investigation revealed that he was the person that set his house on fire.
Finally, investigators were able to turn up enough evidence to put Tim behind bars for arson and insurance fraud. But his shady history still doesn't end there.
Shortly after his release from jail, Tim befriended an elderly woman in Rowan County and moved in with her. Tim managed to convince her to appoint him as her power of attorney and was responsible for her estate. Then in April 2016, this woman died under suspicious circumstances, and Tim was the executor of her estate.
There was whispers that he killed her for her money, but that's all they ever were, whispers.
Soon after, Tim moved to Concord, North Carolina for a fresh start and got another job as a preacher. It was there he met Katrina Paul and her family.
It wasn't too much of a big church. It was a growing church, but he was a good preacher.
However, to the investigators in Charlotte, one thing is now clear. Tim Crumedy was far from a righteous man.
Tim was not the servant of God everyone thought he was, the upstanding citizen. Instead, he was a career criminal with a trail of bodies in his wake.
Homicide.
And when detectives receive a call from the hospital where Michael and Katrina are undergoing treatment, it sounds like Tim's body count may have just gone up.
Despite the doctor's best efforts, they were unable to remove the bullets from Michael's brain because they had gone so far through. And unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries.
I sat there as he took actually his last breath.
When I learned that Michael passed away, it hurt me because I knew how much my mother loved Michael. I knew how much Michael loved my mother.
But in spite of the tragic news, there's also a glimmer of hope.
The doctors had better news about Katrina.
Miraculously, neither bullet penetrated her brain.
She was in stable condition.
Okay, we'll be right there.
And she's ready to talk to detectives.
Despite her weak condition, she was very ready to tell them exactly what happened to her.
Homicide detectives in Charlotte, North Carolina are zeroing in on Tim Crumedy as the prime suspect in the shootings of Michael Gretzinger and his fiancée, Katrina Paul.
Michael unfortunately passed away from his injuries at the hospital, but doctors were able to save Katrina.
Now that Katrina is out of surgery and in stable condition, she's ready to speak with detectives.
Despite her weak condition, she was very ready to tell them exactly what happened to her.
She tells investigators that there's no doubt in her mind who shot her.
She says it was Tim Crumedy.
Timothy. He always put on this persona that he was a great man, that he was a child of God, and he really wasn't.
Katrina tells the detectives when she first met Tim almost 2 decades ago, she had no idea his pious persona was a total sham.
About 2001, my mom came home from church one Sunday. She had a great service, and she wanted us to come to church with her next Sunday. I said, okay, cool, we go to church. The pastor was Tim.
Katrina and Tim hit it off from day one.
When she first met Tim, she was enamored by him.
He spoiled my mom, and he did everything that he could to keep her happy.
But once they started dating, Katrina began to see a different side of her pastor boyfriend.
Over time, Tim became more and more controlling in their relationship. He wanted to know who Kim was talking to. Where was she going? Who was she with? When would she be back?
He had been stalking her and peeking through our windows and stuff. It was crazy. Only Satan is that controlling.
Eventually, Katrina realized she needed to find a way out of the relationship.
She had made several attempts to remove Timothy from her life. I think she went about it the way, we're all taught, you don't accept phone calls, you move away.
She took a restraining order out on him because he was crazy. He just became obsessed with her.
Then, in 2014, she met Michael Gretzinger.
She realized when she met Michael that she was with someone who respected her, who loved her.
My mother was happy and in love.
Katrina felt like she'd finally erased him from her life until the night of August 5th, 2016.
Katrina and Michael were supposed to go out on a date that night, but on their way to the restaurant, Katrina realized she had forgotten her phone.
She realized she left her cell phone at home, so they turned around to go back.
But when they arrived back home, there was an unwelcome surprise waiting for them.
Somehow, Timothy found out where my mother lived, and he got into the apartment.
Tim, what are you
Shut
doing
up.
here?
Shut up. You, get over there. Okay. Get on your knees.
Okay. Take it easy. Take it easy.
She watched in horror as Tim forced Michael to his knees.
Then he fired 2 shots into his head.
Timothy shot Michael and left him bleeding on the floor.
But for Katrina, her waking nightmare was only beginning.
He then tied her hands behind her back and forced her into the passenger seat of her own car, and then drove her to his home in Rowan County.
He kept her there for several hours, just trying to figure out what to do, before ultimately putting her back in the car.
From there, Tim drove Katrina to a rural area on the outskirts of Charlotte.
He pulled her out of the car, and Tim told her to turn around.
She thought he was about to untie her and set her free.
But instead, Tim drew his weapon.
He raised his gun and shot her in the back of the head. Once she fell to the ground, he aimed and fired again.
With her ears ringing, Katrina thought for sure she was dying.
But God had other plans. She was still alive.
If Katrina wanted to continue living, Tim couldn't find out that her heart was still beating, and beating faster than ever.
She continued to play dead as Tim loaded her in the trunk of his car and drove her to another location.
When the car stopped and Katrina heard Tim get out, she kept waiting.
She waited in the trunk in darkness, unsure what would happen next.
Eventually, she decided she needed to get help if she was going to survive.
She started to try and get out of the trunk, pushing against the back of the seat and feeling around to see if there was anything that would help her get out.
My mother got out the trunk from a latch that was in the trunk that you can pull.
As she emerged from the trunk, she was relieved to see she was back at her apartment complex.
Miraculously, she was able to stumble upstairs and call 911.
You were shot in the head?
Yes, ma'am.
She was fading, like she was trying to leave, but she was too strong. She was fighting it.
It's extremely rare to survive a gunshot wound to the head, but 2 gunshots, that's practically unheard of.
However, the joy over Katrina's miraculous recovery is marred by the ongoing investigation into her daughter's disappearance.
Did Tim say anything to you about Anastasia?
About Star? No, why?
To go through an ordeal like that, only to pull through, And to realize that your child is missing, that had to be a devastating blow.
We know that you've been through a lot already.
We're going to find her.
Armed with Katrina's statement, the investigators are ready to make their move on Tim Crumedy.
They have all the evidence they need to arrest Tim. Police take Tim into custody that Sunday.
Police charged him with first-degree murder and also assault, kidnapping, and attempted murder.
Tim's congregation is stunned.
When you're a pastor, people trust you. The congregation trusts you. They believe in you. They believe that you're giving the word of God. And to have this happen, you know, the public was actually so shocked at all of it.
But where is Katrina's youngest daughter, Star?
Investigators really believed he knew where Star was.
They feel like they are at Tim's mercy to get the information they need about her disappearance.
After surviving the brutal attack that claimed her fiancé's life, Katrina Paul has told detectives that the man responsible for pulling the trigger is her ex-boyfriend, Tim Crumedy.
I just thought it was a miracle that she survived. It's proof that not only is God watching over us, but he's not done with her yet.
Now, North Carolina police have taken Tim into custody and are trying to get a confession out of him, as well as the whereabouts of Katrina's missing daughter, Star.
Where is she, Tim?
Unfortunately, Tim isn't forthcoming.
I have nothing to say to you. I want an attorney.
Tim refused to admit to anything.
While Tim is booked into jail to await trial, the investigators continue their efforts to find Star.
The detectives did their best. They tried, but no one could find her.
I never accepted that she was gone, not for a second. I still had hope that my sister was somewhere.
But as more time passes, that hope becomes harder to hold on to.
It was months, and then it was years. And as Tim's trial approached, they still didn't have any answers about what happened to Anastasia.
I was angry. I was very angry.
I just felt so sorrowful for the family, the suffering they went through. I don't know how they deal with that burden.
Despite their pain, Katrina's family is standing strong by their mother's side when Tim's trial gets underway in February 2018.
When prosecutors make their opening statements, they contend that this crime was about one thing: control.
Timothy was a controlling man. He was a very controlling man.
When Katrina broke up with him and started dating Michael, prosecutors said that lit a flame of jealousy in his heart.
The thought of being rejected, it pushed him over the edge.
According to the prosecution, the events that played out on the night of August 5th, 2016, were the direct result of Tim's unbridled jealousy and rage.
Tim executed his romantic rival in cold blood and attempted to do the same to his ex-girlfriend. But by sheer luck, she managed to survive.
Among the prosecution's first witnesses was the first officer on the scene, who testified that he saw someone in a green t-shirt running away on the night in question. In court, he identified Tim Crumedy as that person he saw running away.
Investigators thought he may have grabbed a towel from Katrina's apartment to wipe his fingerprints from the crime scene.
But the prosecution's most powerful witness by far is Katrina Paul herself.
Before Katrina took the stand, they played her audio from her 911 call, and it just sent a chill through the entire courtroom.
He shot me. He shot me.
I heard my mom on that 911 call, and I just lost it.
To have that played in a courtroom and broadcast everywhere, that is one brave woman.
Brave enough to take the stand and confront the man who shot her face to face.
It was the first time that she had seen Tim since that night, and he stared at her coldly as she testified.
Katrina was able to describe her incredible story of survival to the jury about getting kidnapped by her ex, shot in the head not once but twice, and escaping from the trunk of the car to get help. It's nothing short of a miracle that she survived to tell them what happened to her.
When the jury retires to deliberate, they take 2 full days to weigh the evidence.
In the end, they found Tim guilty of first-degree murder of Michael Gretzinger, as well as the kidnapping and attempted murder of Katrina Paul.
Tim Cremiti is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The public was so shocked at all of it. Shocked that a man who professed to be the representative of God would do this.
For Katrina Paul and her loved ones, it's gratifying to see Tim sent away for life. But no punishment can make up for what he did to them.
I don't feel like justice has been served, only because he's still here.
I thought it was too lenient. I thought there's ever a time where capital punishment should be in play. I thought this was one of those times.
And even after Tim is sentenced for his attack on Michael and Katrina, her family still doesn't have answers on Anastasia's whereabouts.
Everyone believed Tim had something to do with her disappearance, but he wouldn't talk.
Another year goes by without any new developments in the case. But on January 15, 2019, deputies with the Iredell County Sheriff's Office just outside Charlotte receive a chilling 911 call.
Somebody was going to look at some land in Mooresville, and he came across some remains.
They found 70 human bones strewn about a wooded area behind a grocery store.
That evidence was sent eventually to North Carolina State Forensic Team.
It was Anastasia Meters.
For Anastasia's family, it's bittersweet news.
When I found out that it was my sister, I just broke down. We didn't have to look no further. We knew that she was on her journey to heaven.
After that, I just felt cold. I just felt I felt a lot of anger.
I'm an older sister, and looking at I would have traded tastes with her.
Although the motive for Starr's murder is still unclear, her family believes it was just another way Tim tried to get back at Katrina for leaving him.
Tim is still the main suspect in Anastasia's murder, but the case is still ongoing and he has not been tried for the crime.
I think that no one imagines these kind of things happening.
This kind of person is moving amongst us every single day. There are other Tim Cremitis out there.
He was the devil's child, I would say.
Don't ever think it can't happen to you, because it really can.
If nothing else, the incident showed us how much we do truly love each other.
Tim didn't take everything from me. He thought he did, but he didn't. I still have my mother. She's still beautiful and strong. It only made her strong. It didn't break us.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799.
The first thing people noticed about West Oakland after sunset was not the silence. It was the absence of it. Long before midnight, the neighborhood had already settled into a rhythm that outsiders rarely understood. Freight trains rumbled across aging tracks only a few blocks from rows of weathered houses. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks stained by decades of neglect. The distant echo of sirens blended with the growl of traffic coming off Interstate 880, while helicopters occasionally carved slow circles across the dark California sky. On warm nights, windows remained open despite the danger. Families tried to catch whatever breeze drifted in from the bay. Children fell asleep to noises that people living elsewhere would have called alarming. Here, they were simply part of another evening. For many residents, fear did not arrive as a dramatic event. It became routine. It lived in the hesitation before answering a knock on the door. It appeared in the nervous glance over a shoulder while walking home from work. It settled into conversations whispered on front porches after sunset, where neighbors exchanged stories about another shooting, another arrest, another young man who had disappeared into the county jail. The late 1990s had transformed West Oakland into one of California's most heavily policed neighborhoods. City officials faced relentless pressure to stop drug trafficking, gang violence, and rising homicide numbers. Newspapers demanded action. Politicians promised stronger enforcement. Every successful arrest was celebrated as proof that the city was fighting back against crime. But statistics rarely tell the entire story. Behind every arrest number stood a human being. Behind every police report stood an officer whose version of events was often accepted without question. In neighborhoods where distrust between residents and law enforcement had been growing for decades, there was one assumption that almost nobody believed could ever be challenged. If a police officer said something happened, the system usually believed the officer. That assumption would eventually be shaken by one of the most explosive police corruption scandals in modern American history. The case would not begin with a murder scene hidden in the woods. There would be no anonymous serial killer leaving cryptic messages. There would be no single victim whose disappearance launched a nationwide search. Instead, this story unfolded under flashing red and blue lights that people had been taught represented safety. The uniforms never changed. The badges looked genuine. The patrol cars carried the city's seal. Everything appeared legitimate. That was exactly what made the truth so difficult to recognize. For months, then years, certain people in West Oakland claimed they had been stopped for no reason. They described being forced against walls, thrown onto pavement, handcuffed before anyone explained why they were being detained. Some insisted drugs suddenly appeared during searches after officers claimed to have found narcotics. Others said they were beaten until they confessed to crimes they never committed. Most of those stories disappeared almost as quickly as they were told. Because who would believe them? Many had criminal records. Some struggled with addiction. Others lived on the margins of society where credibility was often measured not by evidence but by reputation. Against the word of a police officer, they had almost nothing. Each complaint looked isolated. Each allegation seemed impossible to prove. Each bruised face eventually healed. Each police report entered another filing cabinet. The city kept moving. Then something changed. One voice became two. Two became five. Five became dozens. Suddenly, stories told by strangers who had never met one another began sounding almost identical. The same methods. The same language. The same patrol team. The same fear. The same names appeared over and over again. People started whispering about a group of officers who worked the night shift with unusual confidence. They drove aggressively through West Oakland, searching alleyways, parking lots, abandoned buildings, and street corners. Fellow officers knew them as productive cops who generated arrests at a remarkable pace. Supervisors praised their initiative. Their numbers looked impressive. In an era obsessed with measurable results, they appeared to be exactly the kind of officers every department wanted. They called themselves the Riders. The nickname sounded almost playful. Its reality was anything but. According to those who later came forward, encounters with the Riders rarely ended peacefully. A traffic stop could become a beating. A simple question could become an accusation. An arrest could become the beginning of months spent fighting criminal charges supported by official reports carrying the weight of sworn testimony. Still, accusations alone do not solve cases. Complaints alone rarely dismantle institutions. Power protects itself. It asks for proof. And proof is difficult to find when those responsible for documenting the truth may also control the narrative. For a long time, that was exactly the problem. There were no body cameras. Dashboard cameras were uncommon. Cell phones capable of recording encounters had not yet become part of everyday life. Almost every disputed encounter came down to one person's word against another's. On one side stood frightened residents. On the other stood sworn police officers. The scales rarely balanced. Yet history has shown that secrets inside powerful institutions seldom remain buried forever. Sometimes they collapse because an outsider uncovers them. Sometimes they fall apart because someone inside decides they can no longer remain silent. In Oakland, the first crack did not come from an investigative journalist or a federal prosecutor. It came from another police officer. He had worn the same uniform. He had driven the same streets. He understood the unwritten rules that governed loyalty inside law enforcement. Every profession has expectations. Police work has one of the strongest. Officers depend on each other for survival. Trust between partners can mean the difference between life and death. Breaking that trust carries consequences that extend far beyond the workplace. Yet there comes a point when loyalty to colleagues collides with loyalty to the law itself. That collision would ignite a chain reaction nobody inside the Oakland Police Department could fully control. Once the allegations surfaced, investigators faced a disturbing possibility. What if these were not isolated incidents? What if official reports had been falsified? What if evidence had been planted? What if innocent people had spent months behind bars because someone wearing a badge had manufactured probable cause? The questions grew larger with every interview. Each answer led to another complaint. Each complaint uncovered another witness. Residents who had remained silent out of fear began wondering whether they were no longer alone. Families started revisiting arrests they had accepted years earlier because they believed there had been no point fighting City Hall. Defense attorneys reopened conversations with former clients. Civil rights advocates began collecting stories that had once been dismissed as unbelievable. The walls surrounding the department did not collapse overnight. Institutions rarely fail that quickly. Instead, they cracked slowly, one testimony at a time. Some officers insisted everything had been exaggerated. Others denied every allegation completely. Supporters argued that aggressive policing was necessary in neighborhoods overwhelmed by violent crime. They warned that criticizing proactive officers would only make dangerous streets even less safe. Critics answered with another question. If public safety depends on lies, is it truly safety? That question echoed far beyond Oakland. It reached courtrooms, City Hall, police academies, federal agencies, and eventually, the entire nation. Because this case was never only about 4 officers. It became a story about accountability. About the extraordinary authority society grants to those entrusted with enforcing the law. About what happens when that authority is abused. And about how difficult it can be to restore public trust once it has been shattered. Years later, legal experts, historians, retired investigators, and civil rights organizations would continue studying what happened inside the Oakland Police Department during those years. The scandal would reshape policies, force sweeping reforms, trigger one of the longest-running federal oversight efforts imposed on an American police department, and become required reading for generations of officers learning what accountability truly means. But none of that was visible at the beginning. At the beginning, there were only scattered accusations floating through neighborhoods where few people expected anyone important to listen. There was a patrol team with an intimidating reputation. There were official reports carrying government seals. There were frightened residents trying to convince others that something deeply wrong was happening after dark. And there was one young officer preparing to make a decision that would change not only his own career, but the future of policing in Oakland. The story of the Oakland Riders is not simply about corruption. It is about the dangerous space where fear, power, silence, and unquestioned authority intersect. It is about a city desperate for protection, a police department under enormous pressure to produce results, and the ordinary men and women whose lives became caught between those competing demands. Most importantly, it is a reminder that justice is not measured solely by the number of arrests made or convictions secured. Justice depends upon truth. When truth itself becomes uncertain, every institution built upon it begins to shake. This is the story of how 4 officers, 1 whistleblower, dozens of residents, and a city searching for answers became part of one of the most consequential police misconduct scandals in American history, a story whose consequences would continue unfolding for nearly a quarter of a century. Long after the flashing lights faded from the streets where it all began, the sun rose slowly over the eastern edge of the San Francisco Bay, casting a pale orange glow across the sprawling maze of railroad tracks, abandoned warehouses, aging apartment buildings, and narrow residential streets that made up West Oakland. In photographs taken from a distance, the neighborhood looked almost peaceful. The skyline of downtown Oakland shimmered nearby, and across the water stood San Francisco, a city recognized around the world for innovation, prosperity, and breathtaking views. Yet only a few miles separated 2 very different realities. Visitors crossing the Bay Bridge often never ventured into West Oakland. To many Californians, it was little more than a name mentioned during evening news broadcasts whenever another shooting occurred or another major narcotics operation made headlines. For the people who actually lived there, however, West Oakland was far more complicated than the statistics suggested. It was a neighborhood built by generations of working-class families, many of whom had remained despite decades of economic decline, industrial pollution, shrinking employment opportunities, and persistent crime. Children still rode bicycles through side streets. Church bells still rang on Sunday mornings. Corner stores still opened before sunrise. Neighbors still looked after one another. Life continued because it had to. But by the late 1990s, life in West Oakland had become inseparable from one constant presence: police. Patrol cars rolled through the neighborhood from morning until long after midnight. Officers parked beside convenience stores, cruised slowly down residential blocks, and watched intersections known for open-air drug sales. Helicopters occasionally hovered overhead, their searchlights sweeping across rooftops before disappearing into the darkness. Residents learned to distinguish the sound of sirens approaching from those fading into the distance. For some people, those sounds represented security. For others, they represented anxiety. The relationship between the Oakland Police Department and many residents had already been strained for years. Complaints about excessive force, racial profiling, and aggressive enforcement were not new. Community meetings frequently became emotional as citizens accused officers of treating every young black man as a potential suspect. Police representatives responded that officers faced extraordinary dangers every day and could not afford hesitation when confronting armed criminals. Both sides believed they were speaking from experience. Both carried scars. The national conversation surrounding policing looked very different in those years than it does today. There were no smartphones recording every encounter. Social media did not exist as a platform capable of spreading eyewitness videos across the world within minutes. Most police interactions happened beyond public view. If someone claimed an officer had assaulted them during an arrest, proving it was extraordinarily difficult. If an officer wrote that a suspect had resisted arrest, courts often accepted that statement unless overwhelming evidence suggested otherwise. Official paperwork carried enormous weight. And paperwork was written by the police. City leaders demanded results. Oakland's homicide numbers remained troubling. Drug trafficking generated violence that spread across neighborhoods already struggling with poverty. Local newspapers regularly criticized city officials for failing to control crime. Business owners worried about customers avoiding certain districts. Parents feared allowing their children outside after sunset. Political pressure grew stronger every year. The message sent to law enforcement was unmistakable. Reduce crime. Increase arrests. Show progress. Inside the Oakland Police Department, commanders searched for officers willing to work the city's toughest assignments. The night shift in West Oakland required individuals comfortable entering neighborhoods where gunfire was not uncommon and backup could sometimes take precious minutes to arrive. It was dangerous work. Many officers performed it with professionalism and restraint. Others developed a very different philosophy. Among those assigned to patrol West Oakland was a small group of officers who developed a reputation unlike anyone else in the department. They worked aggressively. They moved quickly. They rarely ended a shift without multiple arrests. Their reports consistently reflected productivity that attracted attention from supervisors. To many inside the department, they represented exactly what proactive policing should look like. The 4 officers were Francisco, Choker, Vasquez, Matthew Hornung, Clarence, Chuck, Mabanag, and Jude Siapno. Together, they became known by a nickname that sounded almost cinematic. The Riders. No official unit carried that title. It was a name they embraced themselves. The nickname reflected the way they patrolled the streets, constantly moving from one corner to another, searching for suspected criminals before crimes could occur. They drove with confidence that bordered on swagger. Their patrol vehicle became instantly recognizable to many residents who learned to tense whenever its headlights appeared at the end of a block. Inside police circles, productivity mattered. Arrest numbers mattered. Weapons recovered mattered. Drug seizures mattered. The Riders appeared exceptionally productive. Their supervisors saw statistics. Neighborhood residents increasingly remembered something else. Fear. Some people claimed the Riders never approached calmly. Encounters often began with shouted commands before anyone understood what was happening. Hands were forced against walls. Bodies were searched. Questions came after force rather than before it. Still, allegations remained exactly that. Allegations. Every profession develops reputations that become larger than reality. Some officers acquire legendary status simply because they work harder than others. Criminal suspects often accuse police of misconduct after being arrested. That was the explanation many accepted. At least initially. The Riders themselves projected confidence. They believed aggressive policing saved lives. Violent neighborhoods, they argued, required decisive action. Hesitation gave dangerous offenders opportunities to escape or attack. Every traffic stop could conceal illegal weapons. Every suspicious movement might signal deadly intent. Many officers across America shared similar beliefs during that era. Communities devastated by gang violence often demanded tougher enforcement while simultaneously criticizing aggressive tactics. It was an impossible balance. Police leaders wanted officers who acted decisively without violating constitutional rights. Reality rarely unfolded so neatly. The streets of West Oakland presented situations filled with uncertainty. Dark alleys. Abandoned buildings. Groups gathering on corners after midnight. Cars slowing briefly before driving away. People running as patrol vehicles approached. Every decision carried consequences. An officer who failed to stop an armed suspect could face devastating criticism if violence followed. An officer who stopped the wrong person risked violating someone's rights. Those split-second judgments accumulated night after night. Pressure changed people. Some became more cautious. Others became more aggressive. Some began believing the ends justified the means. If a dangerous criminal went to prison, did every detail of the arrest matter? If illegal drugs were removed from the streets, would anyone question how they had been discovered? These questions lingered beneath the surface of policing long before the Oakland Riders became national news. Most officers never crossed legal boundaries. Investigators would later ask whether this particular group had. Yet during those years, very few people imagined the department stood on the edge of one of the largest scandals in its history. Inside briefing rooms before each shift, officers received assignments, reviewed recent incidents, and discussed neighborhoods requiring additional patrols. Maps marked areas experiencing increased violence. Supervisors reminded officers to remain alert. Every shift began with the understanding that nobody knew exactly what the next 8 hours would bring. Some nights passed quietly. Others erupted without warning. A routine traffic stop could transform into a foot pursuit. A disturbance call could reveal an armed suspect. A report of suspicious activity might uncover narcotics trafficking. The unpredictability created constant tension. For officers working these streets, adrenaline became routine. For residents, uncertainty became equally familiar. Parents taught children not to linger outside after dark. Store owners installed reinforced doors. Grandparents watched grandchildren play from front porches with cautious eyes scanning the street. People adapted because they had no alternative. Yet adaptation also carried another consequence. Communities learned which patrol officers inspired confidence and which inspired fear. The riders slowly acquired a reputation that spread through conversation rather than newspaper headlines. Friends warned friends. Relatives cautioned younger family members. If those officers stop you, people whispered, stay calm. Nobody could explain exactly why. Only that something about encounters with them felt different. Officially, nothing appeared unusual. Arrests continued. Reports were filed. Cases entered the court system. Judges reviewed paperwork bearing signatures from sworn officers. Prosecutors relied upon those reports when pursuing criminal charges. Defense attorneys challenged evidence when possible, but without independent witnesses or recordings, the written accounts often carried decisive influence. The machinery of justice continued operating exactly as designed. No single complaint seemed capable of stopping it. Perhaps that was the most unsettling aspect of the story. Nothing exploded overnight. No dramatic raid uncovered hidden evidence. No shocking confession immediately exposed widespread corruption. Instead, the foundations shifted almost invisibly. One accusation. Then another. Then another. Most disappeared into administrative processes few outside the department understood. Some residents stopped reporting incidents altogether because they believed nothing would change. Others feared retaliation. Some simply wanted to move on with their lives. Silence can become contagious. Especially when people conclude speaking carries greater risks than remaining quiet. The Oakland Police Department remained focused on reducing crime. Community activists continued demanding accountability. City leaders balanced political pressure from every direction. Ordinary families tried to survive another year. None of them realized that somewhere inside the department, an officer was wrestling with his own conscience. He had watched enough to recognize that something no longer felt right. He understood the culture of loyalty expected among police officers. He also understood the oath every officer took before receiving a badge. Soon, those two obligations would collide. When they did, the story of the riders would stop being a collection of neighborhood rumors and begin transforming into an investigation that would shake Oakland, divide the police department, and force an entire city to confront a painful question. What happens when the people trusted to enforce the law are themselves accused of breaking it? There was no single victim in the Oakland Riders scandal. There was no photograph that came to define the entire case, no one family whose tragedy stood above all the others, no solitary crime scene where investigators could point and say, this is where everything began. Instead, there were dozens of stories. Dozens of ordinary people who had never met one another. People of different ages, different backgrounds, and different life experiences. Some had criminal records. Some had never been arrested before. Some struggled with addiction. Some were simply trying to get home after work. What united them was not who they were. It was what they said had happened to them. For years, many of these stories lived only inside living rooms, kitchen tables, church basements, and conversations between close friends. People told them quietly. Not because they were unsure of what they had experienced, but because they doubted anyone would believe them. In neighborhoods like West Oakland, distrust had become almost hereditary. Parents warned their children how to behave if they were ever stopped by police. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't argue. Don't make sudden movements. Answer their questions. The advice was not necessarily born out of hatred. It was born out of survival. Every family had heard stories. Some had lived through them. A traffic stop that turned violent. A search that seemed unnecessary. An arrest that left more questions than answers. For many residents, police encounters were unpredictable events that depended less on what someone had done and more on who happened to step out of the patrol car. As complaints about the riders slowly surfaced, investigators began noticing something unusual. People who had never spoken to one another described remarkably similar encounters. Not identical, but disturbingly familiar. Late at night. A patrol car slowing beside them. Bright spotlights flooding their faces. Orders shouted before explanations were given. Hands against a wall. Hands behind their backs. Questions coming only after they were already in handcuffs. Some remembered the smell of pepper spray before they understood why force was being used. Others remembered knees pressing into their backs while someone searched their pockets. Many remembered confusion more vividly than pain. The confusion stayed with them for years. Why had they been stopped? Why had they been treated that way? Why did nobody seem interested in hearing their side afterward? For some, the answers never came. One man later described walking home after visiting a relative. The streets were nearly empty. Storefront security gates had already been pulled down for the night. The only sounds came from distant traffic and the occasional barking dog. A patrol car approached slowly. He expected officers to ask a few questions. Instead, he said he found himself pushed against a wall before he could fully understand what was happening. According to his account, officers searched him repeatedly. Nothing illegal appeared. Then, moments later, he was told narcotics had been discovered. He insisted the drugs had never belonged to him. The police report said otherwise. His family believed him. The court believed the report. He entered the criminal justice system carrying a label that would follow him long after the case ended. Another resident recalled being stopped while sitting inside a parked vehicle. Friends were nearby. The evening had been ordinary. Laughter disappeared the moment police lights flashed. He claimed officers ordered everyone out of the car. The search quickly became aggressive. Raised voices turned into physical force. By the end of the encounter, arrests had been made. Official paperwork later described resistance. The people present insisted nobody had resisted until force had already begun. Again, there were only two competing versions of reality. One written on official forms. The other remembered by frightened civilians. Without independent witnesses considered completely impartial, proving either version became almost impossible. That pattern repeated itself over and over again. Some alleged they were struck with batons. Others described punches delivered after they had already been restrained. Several complained of excessive use of pepper spray. A few claimed they had been driven to isolated locations before being released without explanation. Not every allegation could be verified. Investigators understood that memory can be imperfect. Fear influences perception. Trauma changes how people remember events. But investigators also recognized another important fact. When dozens of strangers independently describe similar experiences involving the same officers, patterns deserve attention. One name gradually became impossible to ignore. Delphine Allen. Unlike many others who feared speaking publicly, Allen eventually became one of the most recognizable faces connected to the scandal. Her account painted a picture that was both deeply personal and profoundly disturbing. According to Allen, what began as a police encounter escalated rapidly into violence. She alleged that she was handcuffed. She said she was struck repeatedly. She described being sprayed with pepper spray. She recalled blows from a metal baton. The physical pain eventually faded. The emotional scars did not. Official police reports presented a dramatically different version. According to officers, Allen had resisted arrest. Force, they claimed, became necessary because of her actions. The contradiction could not have been greater. One version portrayed officers responding appropriately to resistance. The other portrayed a restrained woman subjected to unnecessary violence. Who was telling the truth? That question would become one of the defining issues surrounding the Riders' investigation. Allen's allegations did not remain isolated. Her story gained significance because it echoed so many others. Different streets. Different dates. Different circumstances. Yet familiar themes emerged. Residents described feeling powerless the moment an encounter began. Once handcuffs clicked shut, they believed the outcome had already been decided. Many later explained that the criminal charges themselves were only part of the damage. Losing employment proved equally devastating. Employers rarely waited for lengthy court proceedings. An arrest alone often cost someone their job. Parents struggled to explain sudden disappearances to their children. Families borrowed money for legal representation. Rent went unpaid. Cars were repossessed. Small consequences multiplied into life-changing ones. Even when charges were eventually reduced or dismissed, the financial and emotional damage remained. One former defendant later reflected that the hardest part was not sitting inside a jail cell. It was realizing that almost everyone automatically assumed the police had been right. Neighbors looked differently at him. Potential employers stopped returning calls. Friends quietly distanced themselves. His reputation changed overnight. Whether guilty or innocent almost became irrelevant. The accusation itself became punishment. Civil rights advocates working in Oakland began hearing these stories with increasing frequency. Initially, many cases appeared unrelated. Then similarities emerged. Names repeated. Locations overlapped. Specific officers appeared again and again. Lawyers started comparing notes. Defense attorneys reviewed arrest reports more carefully. Community organizations encouraged residents to document every encounter they could remember. Each individual story resembled a single puzzle piece. Standing alone, one piece revealed almost nothing. Placed together, a larger image slowly emerged. Investigators faced an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps these complaints represented something systemic rather than accidental. Perhaps isolated incidents were not isolated at all. That possibility carried enormous implications. If evidence had truly been fabricated in multiple cases, then convictions obtained through that evidence became questionable. If reports contained false statements, courts had unknowingly relied upon inaccurate testimony. If force had been routinely misrepresented, internal oversight mechanisms had failed repeatedly. The implications extended far beyond individual victims. Public confidence in the justice system itself became part of the investigation. Yet every allegation also demanded caution. Experienced investigators understood that accusations alone could not establish guilt. Every claim required corroboration wherever possible. Witnesses needed interviews. Medical records required examination. Court documents demanded review. Police reports had to be compared against civilian accounts. The investigation advanced carefully because its conclusions carried extraordinary consequences. Meanwhile, the residents who had stepped forward lived with uncertainty. Some worried they would face retaliation. Others feared neighbors would accuse them of inventing stories for financial gain. Many had already spent years feeling ignored. Now strangers wearing suits ask detailed questions about events they had tried desperately to forget. Reliving trauma rarely brings relief. It often reopens wounds. For Delphine Allen and many others, telling their stories publicly required revisiting moments they wished had never happened. Every interview forced painful memories back into focus. Every legal proceeding required repeating events under skeptical questioning. Every inconsistency became an opportunity for defense attorneys to challenge credibility. Victims found themselves placed on trial alongside the officers they accused. Their pasts became subjects of examination. Past arrests. Past mistakes. Past addictions. Past relationships. Anything capable of weakening their testimony became relevant inside courtrooms. Some observers questioned whether people with criminal histories deserved the benefit of the doubt. Others answered with a different question. Do constitutional rights depend upon personal history? The law said no. Reality often proved more complicated. As weeks turned into months, the number of reported victims continued growing. Each additional complaint strengthened the argument that investigators were confronting more than isolated misconduct. Community meetings grew larger. Reporters asked harder questions. City officials faced increasing pressure to explain how so many similar allegations could emerge without earlier intervention. West Oakland itself seemed divided. Some residents remained grateful for aggressive policing, believing officers had made dangerous streets safer. Others insisted safety achieved through abuse could never be genuine safety. Both perspectives reflected real experiences. Both deserved acknowledgement. That complexity would define the entire scandal. There were no easy heroes. No simple villains. Only human beings making decisions inside an environment shaped by fear, crime, pressure, and power. Yet beneath every legal argument, every policy debate, and every newspaper headline stood the people whose lives had been permanently altered. Some lost months of freedom. Some lost jobs. Some lost faith in institutions they once believed existed to protect them. Some never fully recovered from the emotional weight of wondering whether anyone in authority would ever admit what they believed had happened. For years, they carried those stories alone. Now, for the first time, the city was beginning to listen. And once those voices were finally heard together, the silence that had protected the riders for so long would begin to disappear. No one woke up that morning believing they were about to become part of a case that would one day be studied in police academies, law schools, and federal oversight reports across the United States. For the people living in West Oakland, life moved according to routines shaped by necessity rather than comfort. Some left home before sunrise to catch buses headed toward warehouses near the Port of Oakland. Others worked construction, cleaned office buildings across the bay, or spent long shifts in restaurants that served customers who knew little about the neighborhoods where the employees returned each night. The streets carried two different identities. During daylight, children walked to school carrying oversized backpacks. Elderly residents watered tiny front gardens squeezed between cracked sidewalks and rusted chain-link fences. Local mechanics rolled open garage doors while the smell of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee drifting from neighborhood cafes. As evening approached, the atmosphere changed. Store owners lowered steel security gates over storefront windows. Parents called their children inside. Street corners that had seemed ordinary a few hours earlier slowly filled with people who had nowhere else to go. Drug dealers watched intersections with practiced patience. Lookouts leaned against telephone poles, pretending not to notice passing patrol cars. Residents learned to recognize the subtle signals that suggested trouble might be coming. A vehicle circling the block twice. Arguments that suddenly became too quiet. Groups scattering for no obvious reason. Police officers noticed these details as well. Every shift demanded constant observation. Every movement could mean nothing, or everything. Among the officers assigned to patrol these streets, the riders had developed a reputation for moving quickly whenever they believed something looked suspicious. According to fellow officers, they rarely hesitated. According to many residents, hesitation never seemed to exist at all. The incidents that later became central to the investigation did not unfold during dramatic hostage situations or violent shootouts. Most began in painfully ordinary ways. A person walking home. Someone sitting inside a parked car. A pedestrian crossing the street. A bicycle rider passing through the neighborhood. Moments that could have ended with brief conversations instead became encounters remembered for years. One recurring pattern described by complainants began with headlights. Late at night, patrol cars often approached with their high beams illuminating pedestrians before emergency lights activated. The bright white light erased faces, making it impossible to see who sat behind the windshield. Then came the spotlight. Powerful enough to freeze someone in place. Powerful enough to communicate control before a single word had been spoken. Residents later described those first few seconds as the moment their heartbeat accelerated. They did not know whether they were being questioned as witnesses, stopped as suspects, or simply ordered to move along. The uncertainty itself created fear. According to multiple allegations later reviewed during the investigation, officers would step from the patrol vehicle already issuing commands. Hands up. Face the wall. Do not move. Get on the ground. The instructions came rapidly. Some people complied immediately. Others hesitated, confused by the sudden confrontation. That hesitation, according to several complainants, sometimes became justification for escalating force. Among the incidents that would receive particular attention was the encounter involving Delphine Allen. Unlike many names buried within police paperwork, Allen's case eventually became one of the most publicly recognized allegations connected to the riders. Her account described an encounter that escalated with alarming speed. According to Allen, what began as police contact quickly turned physical. She alleged that she was restrained. She said she was handcuffed. She claimed officers repeatedly struck her after she no longer posed a threat. She described the burning sensation of pepper spray filling her eyes until vision became almost impossible. Even after losing the ability to see clearly, she alleged that the blows continued. Metal against bone. Concrete beneath her knees. Voices surrounding her that seemed more interested in demanding compliance than understanding what had happened. Time behaved strangely. Moments stretched endlessly. Pain replaced orientation. Later, Allen would recall trying to understand why the encounter had spiraled so quickly. Official reports painted a completely different picture. According to police documentation, Allen resisted officers during the arrest. Force, the report stated, became necessary to gain control of the situation. Two radically different narratives emerged from the same event. One described officers responding appropriately to resistance. The other described unnecessary violence against someone already under control. Without body cameras, independent video, or audio recordings, investigators faced the difficult task of reconstructing events almost entirely through testimony. Allen's allegations alone would have been significant. What transformed them into something larger was how closely they resembled numerous other complaints. Investigators noticed repeated descriptions. People claimed they had been searched multiple times before officers suddenly announced they had located narcotics. Several insisted they watched empty pockets become evidence. Others described officers writing reports that seemed disconnected from what they remembered experiencing. A recurring allegation involved accusations of resisting arrest. Defense attorneys reviewing multiple cases observed that resistance appeared frequently in official narratives. Civilian witnesses often denied resisting at all. The contradiction became impossible to ignore. Every arrest generated paperwork. Every report entered the criminal justice system carrying the presumption of accuracy. Judges relied upon those documents. Prosecutors relied upon them. Defense attorneys challenged them whenever possible. Yet without objective evidence, police reports often became the dominant version of history. That imbalance lay at the heart of the growing controversy. For residents, proving misconduct required evidence they rarely possessed. For officers, documenting probable cause required only written reports completed after each incident. The difference in power was enormous. Several complainants later described another common emotional experience: shock. Not simply from physical force, but from realizing how quickly ordinary life could transform into criminal accusations. Someone leaving a friend's house suddenly found themselves facing felony drug charges. A routine walk home became an arrest record. A brief police encounter evolved into months spent navigating court appearances, attorney meetings, and uncertainty about the future. The consequences extended far beyond jail cells. Families suffered alongside those arrested. Parents worried about children. Children asked why mothers or fathers failed to return home. Employers terminated workers unable to appear for scheduled shifts. Bills accumulated. Rent payments fell behind. Entire households experienced the ripple effects of a single encounter. Many defendants lacked financial resources to hire experienced private attorneys. Public defenders worked tirelessly but carried overwhelming caseloads. Every decision became influenced by risk. Should someone accept a plea agreement while insisting they were innocent? Or gamble on trial despite facing potentially harsher penalties if convicted? Those impossible choices haunted numerous individuals whose cases later drew renewed attention. Meanwhile, inside the Oakland Police Department, daily operations continued. Officers reported for duty. Supervisors assigned patrol areas. Arrests continued throughout the city. Nothing publicly suggested that one patrol team would soon become the focus of intense scrutiny. Within law enforcement, productivity often receives recognition. Officers making numerous arrests may appear especially effective. The riders fit that image. Their activity levels impressed many colleagues. To some supervisors, they embodied aggressive policing during an era demanding decisive action against violent crime. Few questioned whether impressive numbers might conceal troubling methods. At least not yet. The first cracks remained almost invisible. Defense attorneys occasionally noticed similarities among reports. Community advocates documented recurring complaints. Individual officers quietly developed concerns. But institutions rarely change because of whispers. They change when whispers become impossible to dismiss. For victims, however, change seemed painfully distant. Every encounter left something behind. Bruises eventually faded. Pepper spray stopped burning. Cuts healed. Court cases concluded. Yet many described carrying something less visible long afterward. Fear of patrol cars. Anxiety whenever emergency lights appeared behind them. Difficulty trusting anyone wearing a badge. Trauma often survives long after physical injuries disappear. Some residents began altering daily routines simply to avoid potential encounters. They avoided certain streets after dark, walked longer routes home, warned younger relatives never to travel alone at night. These behavioral changes rarely appeared inside official reports. No statistics measured them. No charts documented them. Yet they quietly reshaped daily life across portions of West Oakland. Every flashing patrol light became more than a law enforcement presence. For some, it became a reminder of vulnerability. For others, it remained reassurance that someone stood between ordinary families and violent criminals. The neighborhood itself reflected this painful divide. One household praised proactive officers for removing dangerous dealers from nearby corners. Another household believed those same officers had destroyed an innocent person's future. Both perspectives existed simultaneously. Both influenced public opinion. Both complicated every attempt to determine what had truly occurred. Investigators understood that establishing facts would require extraordinary care. Every allegation demanded examination. Every report required comparison. Every witness needed careful interviewing. Because beneath every conflicting account stood a question larger than any single arrest. Had aggressive policing crossed into systematic abuse of authority? Or were dangerous offenders attempting to discredit officers who had aggressively targeted criminal activity? The answer could not depend upon assumptions. It had to depend upon evidence. Finding that evidence would prove far more difficult than anyone initially imagined. There were no surveillance videos waiting to be discovered. No digital records documenting every movement. No social media clips captured by nearby bystanders. The technology that today often shapes public understanding simply did not exist. Truth would have to emerge the old-fashioned way. Through documents. Through testimony. Through persistence. And through one police officer whose decision to speak would soon transform scattered allegations into the largest internal investigation the Oakland Police Department had ever faced. The incidents themselves had already happened. The people involved had already returned home, or, in some cases, to jail cells. Police reports had already been filed. Cases had already entered the courts. But beneath the surface, something had begun shifting. The official story was no longer the only story. For the first time, enough voices were beginning to tell a different version of what happened on the streets of West Oakland after dark. Soon, those voices would become impossible to silence. The first clues did not lie beneath yellow evidence markers. No detectives knelt beside shell casings. No crime scene tape stretched across an alley while forensic photographers documented bloodstains under flashing lights. The Oakland Riders investigation was unlike nearly every major criminal case that had come before it. Its crime scene was not a single street. It was an entire system. Its evidence was scattered across filing cabinets, arrest reports, medical records, court transcripts, complaint forms, and the fading memories of dozens of ordinary people who had spent years believing no one would ever ask them what had happened. The discovery began quietly. So quietly, in fact, that almost no one outside the Oakland Police Department realized history was beginning to unfold. During the summer of 2000, Officer Keith Batt made a decision that few officers ever expect to make during their careers. Batt had worked alongside members of the Riders. He understood their routines. He knew how they approached patrol. He had seen the culture that existed inside the unit. Like every police officer, he understood the unwritten rule that governed life inside law enforcement. You protect your partner. Police officers depended on one another in situations where hesitation could cost lives. Every traffic stop carried uncertainty. Every building search carried risk. Every radio call could become a life or death encounter within seconds. Trust was survival. Breaking that trust could isolate an officer from colleagues for the rest of a career. Yet Bert reached a point where remaining silent appeared more difficult than speaking. After transferring away from the riders, he reported allegations that would eventually shake the Oakland Police Department to its foundation. His concerns were extraordinary. He alleged that members of the unit had used unnecessary force. He described beatings that exceeded what was legally justified. He alleged unlawful arrests. He raised concerns about officers planting narcotics on suspects. He questioned the accuracy of official police reports. He alleged that false statements had been made under oath. None of these accusations were minor disciplinary matters. If true, they represented potential crimes committed by sworn police officers. Department leaders could not simply ignore such claims. The allegations demanded investigation. Initially, investigators approached the matter cautiously. Internal affairs investigators understood that accusations between officers can arise from personality conflicts, disagreements over tactics, or professional rivalries. Every allegation required verification. Every statement required corroboration. The investigators' first task was not to prove misconduct. It was to determine whether the allegations deserved deeper examination. They began where investigators usually begin. Paperwork. Every arrest generated documents. Incident reports. Use of force reports. Booking records. Evidence logs. Witness statements. Medical information. Court filings. Individually, each document appeared routine. Together, investigators hoped they might reveal patterns invisible during ordinary review. They began comparing reports involving the riders. Certain details immediately attracted attention. Some narratives appeared remarkably similar despite involving different suspects on different dates. Descriptions of resistance followed recurring language. The timing of discovering narcotics often raised questions. Force was frequently justified by nearly identical explanations. None of these observations proved wrongdoing. Police officers frequently use standardized language when completing reports. Still, investigators continued looking. Then another source of information emerged. Civilian complaints. Most police departments receive complaints from members of the public every year. Many involve misunderstandings. Some are found to be unsupported. Others lead to disciplinary action. Standing alone, individual complaints rarely establish broader misconduct. Investigators noticed something different. Multiple complaints involving the riders echoed Bat's allegations. People who had never met one another described encounters sharing striking similarities. Stops without clear explanations. Rapid escalation. Physical force. Claims that narcotics had suddenly appeared during searches. Official reports describing resistance that civilians denied. Patterns began replacing coincidence. Investigators widened the inquiry. The challenge quickly became overwhelming. Every newly reviewed complaint generated additional names. Each witness identified other potential victims. Each interview produced another lead. West Oakland, once viewed merely as the patrol area assigned to the riders, slowly transformed into the central landscape of an expanding investigation. Many residents hesitated before agreeing to speak. Some doubted investigators sincerely wanted the truth. Others feared retaliation. The fear was understandable. The people asking questions represented the same institution being accused. Trust did not develop overnight. Investigators often spent hours listening before asking detailed questions. Some interviews became deeply emotional. Residents described years spent believing nobody would ever believe them. Several admitted they had almost thrown away court paperwork because reopening old memories felt too painful. Others arrived carrying folders stuffed with documents they had preserved for years, hoping someone might someday look at them seriously. The investigation was no longer centered solely on one officer's allegations. It had become something much larger. Meanwhile, prosecutors in Alameda County began paying close attention. If officers had indeed submitted false reports or planted evidence, criminal prosecutions based upon those reports might also be compromised. That possibility carried profound legal consequences. Every conviction connected to questionable evidence demanded careful review. Defense attorneys recognized the significance almost immediately. Cases once considered closed suddenly appeared less certain. Clients contacted lawyers asking whether their own arrests should be re-examined. Public defenders searched old files. Private attorneys requested police records. The criminal justice system began looking backward as well as forward. At the same time, local journalists sensed that something unusual was unfolding. Initially, information remained limited. Police departments rarely discuss active internal investigations publicly. Sources spoke cautiously. Rumors spread faster than confirmed facts. Reporters spent weeks verifying information before publishing anything. Once the first stories appeared, however, everything changed. Headlines describing allegations against a specialized police unit reached neighborhoods across Oakland. For many residents of West Oakland, reading those articles produced conflicting emotions. Some felt relief. Perhaps they had not imagined what happened after all. Others felt anger. If complaints had existed for years, why had no one acted sooner? Telephone lines at attorneys' offices began ringing. Community organizations received new calls. People who had remained silent suddenly wondered whether this was finally the moment to tell their stories. The number of potential witnesses grew. So did the complexity of the investigation. Every new allegation required independent examination. Investigators could not assume every complaint was accurate. Neither could they dismiss similarities without explanation. They walked a narrow path between skepticism and openness. Experienced investigators understood that confirmation bias could destroy credibility. They searched equally for evidence supporting and contradicting allegations. Some claims proved impossible to verify. Memories had faded. Witnesses had moved away. Physical evidence no longer existed. But other pieces fit together with disturbing consistency. Medical records documented injuries. Booking photographs showed bruises. Court documents preserved timelines. Independent witnesses occasionally confirmed portions of disputed encounters. Little by little, isolated fragments formed a broader picture. Inside the Oakland Police Department, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Officers discussed the investigation quietly between calls. Some defended the riders completely. They argued aggressive policing naturally generated complaints from criminals unhappy about being arrested. Others remained uncertain. Few publicly voiced opinions. Everyone understood the stakes. If Bat's allegations proved false, careers had been unfairly damaged. If they proved true, the department faced a scandal unlike anything in recent memory. Supervisors also faced difficult questions. Had warning signs been missed? Had complaints received adequate review? Could stronger oversight have identified problems earlier? Institutional accountability slowly became part of the conversation. The investigation was no longer examining only 4 officers. It was examining the systems responsible for supervising them. Outside police headquarters, community leaders organized meetings where residents shared experiences. Churches opened their doors. Civil rights advocates encouraged documentation. Attorneys explained legal rights. Some gatherings lasted late into the evening as people who had spent years believing they were alone discovered others describing nearly identical encounters. The emotional impact was profound. Isolation gave way to recognition. Recognition gave way to collective determination. One resident reportedly remarked that hearing another person's story felt like hearing someone describe his own life. The details differed. The emotions did not. Fear. Confusion. Helplessness. Anger. The investigation continued expanding. Boxes of records filled conference rooms. Investigators constructed timelines connecting incidents separated by months. Names appeared repeatedly. Locations overlapped. Officer assignments matched dates contained in civilian complaints. Nothing alone proved systematic misconduct. Together, the information demanded answers. Eventually, prosecutors concluded the allegations warranted criminal charges. It was an extraordinary decision. Police officers investigate crimes committed by civilians every day. Prosecuting police officers for alleged misconduct represented a far rarer and far more politically sensitive undertaking. The announcement stunned the city. For members of the riders faced numerous criminal charges, including assault, false imprisonment, filing false reports, violating civil rights, and allegations connected to planting evidence. The story that had begun as one officer's confidential report had now become one of the most significant police corruption cases in California. Television cameras gathered outside courthouses. National media outlets arrived. Community activists demanded accountability. Police unions urged patience, emphasizing that allegations remained unproven. Across West Oakland, reactions varied. Some celebrated what they viewed as long overdue recognition. Others worried that confidence in the police would collapse during a period when violent crime remained a serious concern. Both fears were real. The city found itself confronting two uncomfortable truths simultaneously. Communities needed effective policing. Communities also needed lawful policing. Without both, trust could not survive. As investigators prepared for the coming legal battle, they understood that discovering the allegations had only been the beginning. Proving them beyond a reasonable doubt would be far more difficult. There were still no body camera recordings. No cell phone videos. No forensic evidence capable of resolving every dispute. The courtroom would become the place where competing versions of reality collided. Witnesses would testify. Officers would defend their actions. Attorneys would challenge memories, motives, and credibility. The investigation had uncovered enough to move forward. Now, the justice system would decide whether those discoveries were enough to establish the truth. By the autumn of 2000, the Oakland Police Department was no longer dealing with a handful of complaints. It was confronting a crisis. Inside police headquarters, conference rooms that had once hosted routine strategy meetings slowly filled with thick binders, evidence boxes, arrest reports, complaint files, interview transcripts, and court records stretching back months. Detectives and investigators found themselves reading the same names over and over again. The same officers. The same neighborhoods. The same allegations. What had begun with one whistleblower had evolved into the largest internal investigation in the department's history. No one could predict where it would end. The investigators understood from the very beginning that this would not resemble an ordinary criminal inquiry. Normally, police officers interviewed victims, collected evidence, identified suspects, and presented their findings to prosecutors. Now the roles had been reversed. The suspects wore badges. The witnesses included people who had spent years distrusting law enforcement. The investigators themselves belonged to the same institution whose integrity was suddenly under public scrutiny. Every decision mattered. Every interview carried enormous consequences. Every mistake risked undermining the credibility of the entire investigation. The first challenge appeared almost immediately. Memory. Many of the incidents under review had happened months before investigators ever spoke to the people involved. Human memory fades. Traumatic experiences can become fragmented. Small details change over time. Defense attorneys would almost certainly attack any inconsistency, no matter how minor. Investigators knew they could not rely solely on recollections. Every statement had to be supported whenever possible by independent evidence. They returned to the paperwork. Each arrest generated an astonishing amount of documentation. Incident reports, booking records, property logs, evidence receipts, medical evaluations, court filings, jail intake records, dispatch logs. Investigators spread documents across long tables, comparing one case against another. Patterns continued to emerge. Descriptions of suspects resisting arrest often appeared remarkably similar. Language repeated itself across multiple reports. Narratives followed familiar structures. Again, none of this proved misconduct. Police officers frequently use similar terminology because departments teach standardized report writing. Still, experienced investigators rarely ignored recurring patterns. They looked deeper. Medical records became another important source of information. Several complainants had sought treatment shortly after encounters with the riders. Bruises, cuts, swollen wrists, chemical irritation consistent with pepper spray. None of these injuries automatically established excessive force. Violent arrests can legitimately result in injuries to both suspects and officers. The key question remained whether the amount of force used matched the circumstances described. That required comparing medical evidence with official police accounts. Sometimes the two aligned. Sometimes they raised difficult questions. Investigators also interviewed emergency room staff whenever records suggested they might remember unusual cases. Most could not recall individual patients after so much time had passed. Hospitals treated countless injuries every year. Yet documentation preserved objective observations made long before the controversy became public. Those records carried significant weight. The investigation expanded beyond physical evidence. Detectives began locating witnesses who had been present during disputed encounters. Finding them proved challenging. Some had moved. Others had changed phone numbers. Several wanted nothing more to do with police investigations. Years of distrust had not disappeared simply because investigators now appeared willing to listen. Building cooperation required patience. Some interviews lasted hours before witnesses felt comfortable discussing what they had seen. Others refused entirely. Fear remained powerful. People worried that speaking openly could bring unwanted attention. West Oakland was a close-knit community in many respects. News traveled quickly. Residents knew patrol officers regularly returned to the same streets. Even if retaliation never occurred, many feared the possibility. Investigators understood those concerns. Confidentiality became essential. They assured witnesses that every statement would be evaluated carefully. Some people remained skeptical. Others decided silence had already cost too much. As testimony accumulated, another problem emerged. Nearly every disputed incident contained only two primary versions. The civilian account. The officer's account. Without independent recordings, determining exactly what happened often depended upon credibility. Who appeared more believable? Who had greater motive to lie? Who remained consistent under questioning? These were difficult questions. Especially because many civilian witnesses carried prior criminal convictions. Defense attorneys would almost certainly highlight those records before juries. Prosecutors understood that challenge. They could not simply ask jurors to ignore criminal histories. Instead, they needed corroboration wherever possible. That search for corroboration became relentless. Investigators revisited neighborhoods at different times of day. They examined street layouts, measured distances, compared visibility from various locations. Could a witness realistically have seen what they claimed? Could officers have observed suspicious behavior from where they reported standing? Every physical detail mattered. Some investigators reconstructed encounters almost minute by minute. Dispatch records revealed when officers arrived. Radio transmissions established timelines. Booking paperwork documented later events. Although no single document answered every question, together they helped establish sequences difficult to manipulate after the fact. Meanwhile, pressure mounted outside the investigation. Local newspapers devoted increasing attention to the allegations. Editorials questioned whether aggressive policing had crossed constitutional boundaries. Community activists organized demonstrations demanding transparency. Police supporters warned against rushing to judgment before the facts had been established. Public opinion became sharply divided. For many residents of West Oakland, the investigation represented long overdue accountability. For others, it threatened to discourage officers from aggressively confronting violent criminals. Inside the Oakland Police Department, morale suffered. Some officers privately expressed frustration. They believed years of dangerous work were being overshadowed by allegations involving only a handful of individuals. Others quietly admitted the department had ignored warning signs for too long. Few wished to discuss those opinions publicly. The atmosphere had become tense. Every conversation seemed capable of creating new divisions. Investigators also interviewed officers who had worked alongside the riders. Those interviews varied dramatically. Some colleagues described the unit as hardworking and fearless. They emphasized the dangerous nature of West Oakland and argued that critics underestimated the risks officers faced every night. Others appeared noticeably more cautious. They stopped short of directly accusing fellow officers but acknowledged concerns about aggressive tactics. Investigators paid close attention not only to words but also to hesitation. Sometimes what witnesses avoided saying proved almost as revealing as what they stated openly. One recurring issue involved productivity. The riders consistently generated impressive arrest numbers. At first glance, that appeared commendable. Departments often celebrate officers who remove illegal weapons and narcotics from the streets. Yet investigators asked a different question. Were unusually high arrest numbers achieved through lawful policing? Or had the pressure to produce measurable results gradually encouraged unlawful shortcuts? That question reached beyond 4 individual officers. It touched broader issues affecting policing across the country. Performance evaluations often rewarded statistics. Arrests, searches, drug seizures, firearms recovered. Numbers were easy to measure. Integrity was harder. As investigators continued reviewing cases, prosecutors became increasingly involved. Meetings between detectives and deputy district attorneys stretched late into the evening. Every potential charge required careful legal analysis. Criminal prosecution demanded proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Suspicion was insufficient. Patterns alone were insufficient. The evidence needed to persuade 12 jurors unanimously. That burden remained extraordinarily high. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, prepared aggressively. They argued investigators had become overly willing to believe criminals accusing police officers. They questioned witness credibility. They emphasized dangerous working conditions. They suggested officers faced split-second decisions that outsiders could never fully appreciate. Those arguments resonated with many people. Policing is undeniably dangerous. Officers frequently confront uncertainty impossible to eliminate. the investigation never disputed those realities. Instead, it focused on whether legal boundaries had nevertheless been crossed. One development particularly troubled investigators. As they reviewed older cases, they identified individuals who had served jail time based upon arrests now under renewed scrutiny. Some convictions remained legally valid. Others became subjects of serious concern. Defense attorneys filed motions seeking reconsideration. Judges faced difficult decisions. Could confidence remain in cases where key evidence depended upon officers accused elsewhere of misconduct? The implications expanded rapidly. The investigation no longer centered only upon future criminal charges against the riders. It also threatened to affect previous convictions, civil litigation, departmental credibility, and public trust. Every week brought new complexities. Every answer produced additional questions. Then came an unexpected complication. One of the central figures in the case disappeared. Francisco Choca Vasquez, widely regarded as the informal leader of the riders, vanished before trial preparations reached their conclusion. Authorities believed he had fled to Mexico. Despite efforts to locate him, he failed to appear in court. His disappearance transformed public perception almost immediately. To critics, flight suggested consciousness of guilt. To supporters, it complicated an already difficult legal battle by removing the opportunity for direct testimony. Either way, investigators now faced another obstacle. One of the principal defendants would not stand beside the others during trial. The remaining 3 officers prepared to fight the charges. Investigators finalized reports. Prosecutors organized evidence. Witness lists continued growing. By now, dozens of civilian interviews had been completed. Thousands of pages of documentation had been assembled. Experts reviewed procedures. Supervisors answered uncomfortable questions. The investigation that had begun with one officer's decision to speak had evolved into a case that would test not only individual accountability but the credibility of an entire institution. Yet despite months of painstaking work, everyone involved understood one unavoidable reality. Building an investigation is one challenge. Winning in court is another entirely. Inside a courtroom, certainty gives way to cross-examination. Memories are questioned. Motives are challenged. Every inconsistency becomes magnified. The prosecution believed it had uncovered a troubling pattern. The defense insisted aggressive policing had been mistaken for criminal conduct. Soon, 12 jurors would be asked to decide which version of the truth they believed. And the outcome would surprise almost everyone. By the time the Oakland Riders investigation entered its 2nd year, many people believed the hardest work had already been completed. Investigators had interviewed witnesses. Thousands of pages of reports had been examined. Medical records had been collected. Arrest files had been compared. Civilian complaints had been organized into detailed timelines. From the outside, it appeared that the case was finally taking shape. Inside the investigation, however, prosecutors understood a difficult truth. They had accumulated information. What they still needed was proof strong enough to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are not always the same thing. Patterns can raise suspicion. Consistency can suggest credibility. But criminal convictions require evidence that survives relentless scrutiny. The Oakland Riders case would test that principle more than anyone expected. The first breakthrough had already occurred months earlier, though its full significance only became clear over time. Keith Batt's decision to report what he claimed to have witnessed had fundamentally changed the direction of the investigation. Without an insider willing to come forward, many civilian complaints might have continued to exist as isolated allegations buried inside filing cabinets. Batt's account provided investigators with a starting point. It gave them names, specific incidents, Specific officers. Specific practices to examine. Most importantly, it challenged the assumption that every accusation originated solely from dissatisfied suspects. Now there was an officer raising similar concerns. That mattered. Investigators carefully reconstructed Bat's professional relationship with the riders. They examined his work assignments, interviewed supervisors, reviewed departmental records. Defense attorneys would almost certainly argue that personal conflicts or professional disagreements explained his allegations. Prosecutors therefore needed to establish that Bat's concerns rested on observations rather than resentment. His credibility became one of the most important elements of the entire case. At the same time, another breakthrough slowly emerged from an unexpected direction. The victims began finding one another. For years, many believed they had suffered alone. Each person assumed their experience had been dismissed because it was unique. As media coverage expanded, residents realized that remarkably similar stories had unfolded across West Oakland. Community meetings became places where strangers compared experiences. One person described being ordered against a wall. Another remembered the same commands. Someone recalled pepper spray being used almost immediately. Another nodded in recognition. Some spoke about narcotics appearing during searches after officers claimed to have discovered them. Others quietly admitted that the same thing had happened to them. These conversations did not establish guilt, but they strengthened resolve. People who once feared speaking publicly now understood they were no longer isolated voices. That change proved invaluable. Witnesses who had initially declined interviews reconsidered. Attorneys received additional phone calls. Community organizations documented fresh allegations. The investigation grew stronger because silence gradually disappeared. One particularly significant development involved the careful comparison of arrest reports prepared by the riders. Investigators noticed recurring language that seemed unusually consistent across unrelated incidents. Descriptions of suspects resisting arrest frequently followed similar wording. Explanations for using force often mirrored one another. Again, standardized report writing is common in policing. No investigator suggested that similar language alone established misconduct. But when combined with civilian testimony and other evidence, those similarities became increasingly difficult to ignore. The investigation also revealed another troubling issue. Several arrests attributed to the riders involved individuals who insisted they had been carrying no drugs before police searched them. Ordinarily, such claims would attract little attention. Many defendants deny possessing illegal substances. Yet investigators observed that multiple people described almost identical sequences of events despite having no apparent connection with one another. According to their accounts, they were searched. Nothing was found. Then officers searched again. Only afterward were narcotics allegedly discovered. Investigators recognized that proving evidence had been planted years earlier would be extraordinarily difficult. Physical evidence alone could not answer the question. Instead, prosecutors focused on demonstrating patterns that jurors might consider persuasive when evaluating witness credibility. The legal strategy evolved accordingly. Rather than relying upon a single dramatic incident, prosecutors intended to present multiple witnesses whose testimony collectively described similar experiences. If jurors concluded that unrelated witnesses consistently reported comparable misconduct, they might view individual allegations differently. Defense attorneys recognized that strategy immediately. Their response was equally aggressive. They planned to challenge every witness individually. Every inconsistency. Every prior conviction. Every contradiction. Every imperfect memory. Their objective was straightforward. If enough doubt surrounded each witness, the broader pattern might collapse. Meanwhile, investigators continued searching for objective evidence wherever possible. Dispatch logs established officer locations. Booking records confirmed arrest times. Medical documentation recorded injuries. Court transcripts preserved sworn testimony from earlier proceedings. Every independent document reduced reliance upon memory alone. Little by little, the case became more structured. Still, everyone involved understood its limitations. There were no body camera recordings because body cameras did not yet exist. There were no cell phone videos recorded by bystanders. No dashboard footage captured every encounter. Technology that today often shapes public understanding of police incidents was absent. The courtroom would ultimately depend upon people. People remembering. People explaining. People deciding whom to believe. Outside the investigation, Oakland itself continued changing. The scandal dominated local headlines. Community trust deteriorated further. Police officers responding to ordinary calls increasingly encountered residents who questioned their actions before conversations even began. Many officers who had no connection whatsoever to the riders felt the consequences. Some expressed frustration that years of honorable service seemed overshadowed by allegations involving 4 colleagues. Others privately acknowledged that restoring public confidence required complete transparency, regardless of how uncomfortable the process became. City officials watched events unfold with growing concern. The implications extended beyond criminal prosecutions. Civil lawsuits appeared increasingly likely. Financial liability threatened the city. More importantly, public confidence in municipal government itself had begun to erode. Residents wanted answers. Why had warning signs allegedly gone unnoticed? Were supervisors aware of recurring complaints? Did departmental systems fail? Or had no one recognized a larger pattern until Bat came forward? Those questions remained unanswered. Yet another breakthrough emerged when investigators began viewing the scandal not merely as potential misconduct by individual officers but as a possible institutional failure. Attention shifted toward supervision. Complaint investigations. Training. Internal accountability. Early warning systems. If misconduct occurred repeatedly over an extended period, investigators reasoned, they needed to understand why existing oversight mechanisms had failed to stop it sooner. This broader perspective would later shape reforms extending far beyond the criminal trial itself. Ironically, the greatest breakthrough in the entire case was not a dramatic piece of forensic evidence or an unexpected confession. It was the recognition that dozens of seemingly unrelated stories formed one larger narrative. Every complaint became part of a mosaic. Every interview added another tile. No single witness carried the entire burden. Instead, prosecutors hoped jurors would step back and view the complete picture. Whether that strategy would succeed remained uncertain. Criminal courts demand precision. Patterns can influence understanding. But verdicts depend upon proof attached to specific charges against specific defendants. As trial preparations accelerated, both sides refined their approaches. Prosecutors prepared witnesses for exhaustive cross-examinations. Defense attorneys examined years of records searching for contradictions. Experts reviewed police procedures. Investigators revisited timelines repeatedly, determined to eliminate every avoidable mistake. Then the case took another dramatic turn. Francisco "Choker" Vasquez disappeared before standing trial. Authorities believed he had fled across the border into Mexico. Despite efforts to locate him, he remained beyond the reach of the court. His absence fundamentally changed the dynamics of the prosecution. Jurors would never hear his testimony. His colleagues would face trial without the man many considered the central figure within the riders. Some observers interpreted the disappearance as deeply suspicious. Others cautioned against drawing conclusions from absence alone. The legal process nevertheless continued. 3 officers remained. The prosecution pressed forward. The defense prepared for battle. For investigators, the breakthrough phase had ended. Everything they had spent months assembling now entered a different arena. Inside police headquarters, questions had dominated. Inside the courtroom, answers would be demanded. Witnesses who had waited years to tell their stories would finally take the stand. Police officers would defend actions performed under extraordinary pressure in one of Oakland's most dangerous neighborhoods. Jurors with no personal connection to West Oakland would be asked to evaluate events that had unfolded years earlier on dark streets without cameras, without recordings, and often without neutral eyewitnesses. The truth would no longer be sought behind closed investigative doors. It would be tested publicly. Every memory challenged. Every report examined. Every motive questioned. The breakthrough had revealed a possible pattern of misconduct. Now came the far more difficult task of proving it under the unforgiving standards of American criminal justice. The investigation had carried the case as far as it could. From this point forward, the verdict would belong to the court. When the criminal trial finally began in 2002, anticipation filled far more than the courtroom. For nearly 2 years, Oakland had lived with accusations that struck at the heart of its criminal justice system. Newspapers had chronicled every major development. Community organizations had held meetings packed with residents demanding accountability. Police officers across California watched closely, aware that the outcome could influence public perception of law enforcement far beyond the city limits. By the time attorneys prepared their opening statements, expectations had reached extraordinary levels. Many people believed the trial would finally answer the question that had divided Oakland since the summer of 2000. Had the riders abused their authority and violated the law? Or had they become the targets of false accusations made by criminals seeking revenge against aggressive police officers? The courtroom could not answer every question surrounding policing in America. It could answer only one. Had prosecutors proven the criminal charges beyond a reasonable doubt? The distinction mattered. Public suspicion and criminal guilt are not the same. The burden placed upon prosecutors in American courts is intentionally high because the consequences of conviction are severe. The prosecution entered the courtroom carrying thousands of pages of evidence. Investigators had spent months organizing witness testimony. Civilian complainants prepared to relive encounters they had hoped never to revisit. Medical records had been reviewed. Police reports had been carefully examined. Timelines had been reconstructed. The legal team understood that the strength of their case would depend largely upon credibility. Jurors would spend weeks listening to 2 entirely different versions of reality. The prosecution argued that certain officers assigned to West Oakland had repeatedly crossed legal boundaries. According to their case, the defendants had assaulted civilians, made unlawful arrests, submitted false reports, violated constitutional rights, and in some instances planted evidence to justify arrests that otherwise lacked probable cause. Their argument rested upon the consistency of multiple witnesses whose stories, though involving different incidents, reflected remarkably similar allegations. The defense presented an entirely different picture. They reminded jurors that West Oakland during the late 1990s was among the most dangerous patrol assignments in Northern California. Drug trafficking remained widespread. Violent crime demanded decisive policing. Officers regularly encountered armed suspects, unpredictable confrontations, and rapidly evolving situations. Defense attorneys argued that civilians accused the riders because the officers had aggressively targeted criminal activity. Many witnesses, they emphasized, possessed criminal histories. Some had previously lied to law enforcement. Others faced personal motives for attacking police credibility. According to the defense, the prosecution had built its case upon unreliable testimony rather than objective proof. The contrast could not have been sharper. One side portrayed courageous victims finally receiving an opportunity to be heard. The other portrayed dedicated officers unfairly prosecuted for doing difficult work in an exceptionally dangerous environment. As witnesses entered the courtroom, the emotional weight became immediately apparent. Some spoke quietly. Others became visibly emotional while describing encounters that had occurred years earlier. Several recalled confusion more vividly than fear. They remembered being stopped suddenly, ordered to the ground, handcuffed, struck, accused of crimes they insisted they had not committed. Cross-examination proved relentless. Defense attorneys examined every inconsistency, every forgotten detail, every prior conviction, every discrepancy between earlier statements and current testimony. Even minor differences became subjects of lengthy questioning. The objective was clear. If jurors questioned witness reliability, reasonable doubt might follow. The prosecution expected those attacks. They reminded jurors that traumatic events are rarely remembered with perfect precision. Small inconsistencies, they argued, did not erase broader patterns. Instead, prosecutors encouraged jurors to focus upon recurring themes appearing across unrelated accounts. Several police officers also testified. Some described the realities of working high-crime neighborhoods where hesitation could prove fatal. Others defended departmental procedures. Reports, they explained, reflected officers' observations made during rapidly unfolding events. Force, when used, resulted from resistance encountered in the field. The courtroom became a place where two fundamentally different understandings of policing collided. One viewed aggressive tactics as necessary survival. The other viewed certain tactics as unlawful abuse of authority. Neither perspective could simply dismiss the other. That complexity shaped every day of testimony. Outside the courthouse, reporters summarized each day's proceedings. Residents gathered around televisions during evening news broadcasts. Editorial writers debated the significance of witness testimony. Police unions expressed support for the accused officers while emphasizing the importance of due process. Civil rights advocates urged the public not to lose sight of the people who claimed they had suffered unlawful treatment. The trial gradually became larger than the defendants themselves. It reflected broader national questions concerning accountability, trust, and police power. One absence nevertheless remained impossible to ignore. Francisco "Choker" Vasquez. Authorities believed he had fled to Mexico before standing trial. His chair remained empty. The prosecution could not question him. The defense could not present his explanation. Jurors heard about him without ever seeing him. His disappearance added another layer of uncertainty to an already complicated case. Weeks passed. Evidence accumulated. Attorneys delivered detailed legal arguments concerning constitutional protections, police procedures, and evidentiary standards. The jurors listened carefully. Their responsibility was immense. They understood that any verdict would carry consequences extending well beyond the courtroom. Eventually, the time arrived for closing arguments. The prosecution urged jurors to view the evidence as a whole. No single witness stood alone. No single allegation explained the entire investigation. Instead, prosecutors argued that repeated patterns demonstrated intentional misconduct rather than isolated mistakes. The defense responded by returning to the central principle of American criminal law: reasonable doubt. They reminded jurors that criminal convictions require certainty beyond suspicion. No video recordings existed. No body camera footage confirmed disputed encounters. Many allegations depended almost entirely upon conflicting testimony. If jurors remained uncertain, the law required acquittal. The case then entered the hands of the jury. Deliberations stretched on. Hours became days. observers waited anxiously. Families of complainants hoped years of frustration would finally produce accountability. The defendants waited for decisions that would shape the rest of their lives. Eventually, the jury returned. The outcome surprised many. Jurors were unable to reach unanimous agreement on numerous charges. Several counts resulted in deadlock. Without unanimous verdicts, those charges could not produce convictions. Subsequent proceedings ultimately ended with the remaining 3 officers avoiding criminal convictions, either through acquittals or the dismissal of charges that prosecutors chose not to pursue further after mistrials. For many observers, the verdict felt deeply unsatisfying. Supporters of the officers argued that the outcome confirmed investigators had failed to prove criminal wrongdoing beyond a reasonable doubt. Critics reached a different conclusion. They believed the absence of convictions reflected the extraordinary difficulty of prosecuting cases built largely upon conflicting testimony rather than clear physical evidence. Both interpretations spread rapidly across Oakland. Yet even before the criminal proceedings concluded, another legal battle had already begun to reshape the future of the city. Unlike criminal prosecutions, civil litigation operates under a different standard of proof. Plaintiffs need not establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Instead, they must demonstrate that their claims are more likely than not to be true. That distinction proved crucial. Dozens of individuals who alleged misconduct joined together in a sweeping civil lawsuit against the city of Oakland. Ultimately, 119 plaintiffs participated. The allegations extended beyond individual officers. They questioned supervision, oversight, training, and departmental accountability. The city faced enormous legal and financial pressure. After extensive negotiations, Oakland agreed in 2003 to settle the civil litigation for approximately $11 million without admitting liability. More importantly than the financial settlement, the agreement required sweeping institutional reforms. The city accepted a comprehensive framework demanding changes throughout the Oakland Police Department. Those reforms became known as the Negotiated Settlement Agreement. 51 separate requirements addressed use of force reporting, internal investigations, supervisory accountability, officer training, early warning systems designed to identify problematic behavior, and numerous other reforms intended to strengthen oversight. Ironically, the most enduring consequences of the Riders scandal did not emerge from the criminal verdicts. They emerged from everything that followed. Federal oversight. Independent monitoring. Years of progress reports. Repeated evaluations. Continued public scrutiny. The criminal courtroom had not delivered the clear resolution many expected. Justice, it seemed, would take a different path. Rather than ending with prison sentences, the Riders case transformed into something far larger. It became the catalyst for one of the most extensive police reform efforts in American history. For the victims, the verdicts brought mixed emotions. Some felt disappointed that criminal accountability remained elusive. Others viewed the civil settlement and promised reforms as recognition that their voices had finally been heard. For the officers who had stood trial, the outcome represented legal vindication in the criminal courts. For Oakland itself, however, the story was far from over. The trial had ended. The consequences had only begun.